Hey everyone, this is heyybritny and welcome back to my channel. In today's episode, we are talking about that viral Obama interview. Let's go ahead and get into it. Alrighty, so I'm super excited to react to this interview. So this was an interview between Michelle Obama, Craig Robertson, who's her brother, and then obviously her husband, Barack Obama. So Michelle and her brother have started a podcast, I think this year. There have been different moments from it that have gone viral. One moment that I saw was Michelle talking to either another celebrity, and basically she was talking about how hard it was or how difficult it was to be Black and all of that stuff. And then it was controversial because a lot of people felt like she is obviously wealthy and well off. She does not live an average life, and so there aren't that many things that would be difficult for her to do now compared to maybe 20-30 years ago before they were on the path to the White House. And so what that means is that her lifestyle that she lives right now is not something that most people can relate to, so she's not a good poster child for talking about the average American struggles. Okay, so a moment that has gone viral from a recent interview that Michelle and her brother Craig did with Barack Obama is basically him talking about how boys need exposure to a gay man. They need a gay man as a role model. And I heard people talking about the exact moment where he said that, and I just kind of dismissed it. I was like, okay, whatever, because I know all of the comments about Barack Obama's kind of upbringing and his journey to the White House and all of the controversial stuff with that, and then also the conversations about Michelle, her parents, and all of that stuff, and possibly some other stuff. We're not going to get into that during this video. What we are talking about is just like the ideas that they are sharing with us in the interview. So I've never watched Michelle and Craig. I've never seen their podcast. I've never watched a full episode until now. And I don't know if this is normal, but I really like how Craig narrated or moderated this interview between Michelle and Barack and himself, obviously. Because I felt like Obama, he was at times hard to follow, and it was hard to like connect the point he was making to the bigger topic that they were discussing, which is around raising young men. And then sometimes Michelle would interject and kind of add clarifying comments or questions, or kind of try to get the conversation kind of on track, or kind of just connect the dots for everyone. So I did like the interview. I enjoyed watching it, but I just felt like at times you could clearly see where everyone was kind of playing their role. So Michelle would kind of interject when needed, Craig would moderate, and then Obama would kind of come in and share whatever messages or whatever examples or whatever experiences he wanted to share with the audience and have them take away, and also apply that to the question that they were being asked. So he was really there to lend his Obama voice to the conversation and kind of really get the message out there of how we need to do better for young men in America and in the world at large. Now, I know that Michelle Obama has been getting a lot of flack for, I guess, comments that she's made about their marriage, their relationship, and how, I don't know what she said exactly, but she may have said something about it was basically difficult being married, and there were times where she didn't like him very much or whatever. And there was another YouTuber who was basically talking about how she was embarrassing Obama by sharing all of this information and kind of ruining the legacy that they built up together, because there's been different moments where she's been expected to be by her side and she hasn't been, and then there are rumors that they're maybe getting divorced or they're not getting along or whatever, they're living separate lives and all of that stuff. And so I really like in this interview, she seemed really excited to have Obama there as her husband. There seemed to be some sort of pride that, hey, this is my husband, he's Barack Obama, he's a former president, and she was giving him that respect that it seems like a lot of people are saying was missing from her previous conversations about him. So I do just like that she had that sense of pride of having him on the show, of being married to him and all of that stuff. And I'm not one of those women who's like, my man, my man, my man, and all of that stuff. I don't do that. But I like that she tapped into that sense of pride of having her husband on the show and having him speak and share his insights and all of that stuff. And obviously, as her husband, he is expected to be on the show. That would be weird if you can't get your husband on the show, you guys are married and all of that stuff. And so I really just like that she kind of displayed that pride that I was talking about. And I don't know if that does anything for the rumors, but I just like seeing that moment. Okay, so let's talk about what the viewer question was. So The viewer question, to paraphrase, was basically how do we raise emotionally intelligent and competent men? And the question was around the oppressive and violent dynamics that I guess men are exposed to. So I thought this was a good question, but I didn't think that the question was good because it didn't explain what ideology the viewer thought that her younger brothers and her she had like a 1-year-old infant who was a boy, and so the question was about how do I raise my brothers and my son in this environment, and she didn't really talk about what it was that she felt like her brothers and her son are being exposed to. So I thought that that would have been good to have that additional insight because not everybody is seeing the same messaging. You know, some people live really great lives, some people have really crappy lives, there's people in the middle, and so I think you need to know what the person is seeing out there and how they feel about it. Obviously, we do have some clues with her saying oppressive and violent, but oppressive to who? Oppressive to men, oppressive to women, violence, again, violence against who? So there's some more things that I would want to know to help figure out how to talk about this question and give answers. And then the other thing that they're going to spend some time on, because this was also mentioned in the question, there's this idea of raising our daughters and loving our son. And that seems a little bit complicated. I feel like raising our daughters is really talking about how we kind of prepare our daughters more for the world and then love our sons like we baby them basically. And so obviously, just as a disclaimer, I do not have any kids, so this conversation is a little bit out of my scope, but I do have 3 dogs. I have 1 girl dog and then 2 boy dogs, and I even with our dogs, my sister and I, we talk about kind of like traditional gender roles and expectations and stuff like that, because I have 1 passed away, but I did have 3 male dogs, and my oldest dog Benji, he was kind of softer, he wasn't as aggressive or anything like that. My middle dog Waffles, he's bigger, he's the friendliest, so we say that he's the friendliest puppy that we know because he goes around, he looks at everyone, and he's just really nice. And then my younger puppy Teddy, he's younger, so he's more energetic, he wants to play, he's kind of like the annoying little brother, and the other 2 Waffles will play with him, but Benji would completely ignore him and didn't really interact with him that much. And so even with the 3 boys, there were certain things that we expected them to do. And then with my girl dog, she's the first girl dog that I've had in a while, but there are certain things that we kind of know that she'll do because she's a girl. And then there was stuff that Benji would do, like, oh, you need to toughen up, and I hate it saying that to my dog. Just let Benji be who he wants to be and all of that stuff. And so I kind of understand what they're talking about when we're talking about how we raise girls versus boys. And so obviously that's not relevant to the conversation, so I'm not really going to talk about my dog other than what I just said, but I do just want to give that disclaimer that I do not have children of my own. Okay, so at some point in the interview, Obama was asked about raising daughters because him and Michelle do not have sons. He gave his answer in the context of what it was like for him raising their daughters, and he talked about like their parenting structure. I believe Michelle was working or whatever, and so they talked about, I guess, how Obama would do the night shift and how he was a really hands-on dad. He was really engaged and involved, and Michelle had to learn kind of how to let him have that time with the kids, because she was saying, I guess he did the night shift and she had to learn to not micromanage the time that Barack had with the kids. And I think that is so important because we've been talking about how, I've seen Candace talking about how what's her name, Meghan Markle, like when she's away from her kids, she'll record a video of her reading a book for her kids so that the husband can play it, Prince Harry can play it, and that's just kind of like that micromanaging thing that we're seeing Michelle talk about, where she had to learn not to do that, let Barack do his own thing, let him take care of the kids, trust him to be able to take care of the kids, and if he needs you, he'll reach out to you, that sort of thing. So I think it's super important that we let the dad and the mom have time with the children so that they can establish their own bond, and you can show that trust and faith that they're going to do the right thing, that they know how to take care of the situation, all of that stuff, because otherwise why would you marry that person and have kids with them if you are scared about how they're going to handle your kids? So there is that sense of trust that needs to kind of be restored and has to be relearned, because we do have a lot of fractured families, we do have a lot of single mothers, and so that trust isn't there with the father because they're not always around. They're either working, or they have 50-50 custody, or they only have weekends, or they only see the kid twice a month, whatever. And so that trust is not there to trust that your kid is safe with their father. And so I really like that she talked about having to kind of let go of that control. Tying into like who you're married to and who you have kids with, they talked about how they had similar structures in terms of raising their kids. They wanted to have like unconditional love, they wanted to have discipline and structure, they wanted to make sure that they had good moments with their kids too, but they were able to discipline them when needed, which I think is super important, because you do have some parents who are overly friendly with their kids, like they're trying to be their kids' friend, not their parent. And then you have some parents who are really strict, really structured to where the kid there is no playtime, there is no fun time, because they know that, hey, mom or dad, whoever it is who is really strict, this is the way it needs to be. If I deviate from this is going to be a problem. And so I really have to do what's expected of me and do everything to the T, and just really try to stay out of that person's way basically, and not ruffle feathers or cause any type of friction. The interesting thing that I found that Obama said in terms of raising his daughter, obviously he doesn't have sons, so he was talking about how he thought he would be if he had sons, and he said that he thought he would be more judgmental and harder on his sons than he was on his daughters. And I found that to be interesting, because yes, you do need to raise boys differently than you raise girls, but I don't understand why you would be more judgmental. I feel like you should be firmer with them, but you shouldn't be judgmental to the point where you are making your son feel bad or making him doubt himself. Like, obviously what you need to do is you need to correct any bad behavior, because as a boy, he is going to grow into a man, and there are certain expectations of men in the real world that he needs to be prepared to handle. And if you aren't being a father and teaching and raising your son in that way, that does create problems. So yes, I think you need to be harder and firmer with your son, but I don't think you need to be more judgmental. So I'm very curious on what he meant by that. I don't think he really went into it and elaborated, but I don't know what he would be judgmental of. So like, if you are a stern father and you have a soft-spoken son who's not very dominant and he's kind of like a pushover, obviously you may be judgmental of your son in that way, because he's not the kind of son that you want him to be. And we've seen examples of that in the real world and in TV shows and movies and so on. And so I think that's where I can see the judgmental part coming in. But outside of that, what would you be judgmental over? Okay, so during this conversation, they also referenced, I believe it was Craig who referenced the TV show on Netflix called Forever, and then also Adolescence. So I'm a little disappointed that they did not watch Adolescence. I don't know if I think Michelle and Barack said that they watched Forever. I don't know if they watched Adolescence. So I was disappointed that they brought up those two TV shows without being able to clearly reference what was happening. I do have 2 videos on both TV shows. I have 2 videos on Forever and then 1 on Adolescence. And just to quickly run you through those 2 TV shows if you have not seen them, Forever is an amazing TV show. It is Black focused, and basically, like they were saying in this interview, it doesn't really focus on trauma or any like gangbanging or any really like heavy Black stereotype. It's just 2 Black families living normal lives and kind of just going through normal ups and downs that any kid would experience. So it's not rooted in Black trauma or Black tragedy or any kind of like ridiculous stereotypes that we constantly see played out. If you take, for example, Boys in the Hood, it's nothing like that. It's so much more aspirational, because Boys in the Hood, that's kind of like, there are people who live like that, but that's not the only way that Black people live. And so Forever is a really nice depiction of Black communities and Black families, because you see it in such a more positive light, even though there is something that the main character, I cannot recall what her name is, I'm pretty sure it's Keisha, but I've watched so many shows and I'm forgetting people's names, but basically there's something that she goes through where a video gets out and she really has to like rebuild her life, and then she meets the main character. Gosh, I cannot remember his name. What is his name? Justin? Yeah, she is Justin, yeah. She meets Justin, they have a romance and all of that stuff. And so the mom is focused on making sure that her sons marry Black women or date Black women. She really wants to have like a Black family, I guess. I don't know another way to say it. It's not like she hates white people or she's against white people, but she really just really has that pride in continuing, I guess, her Black heritage. And then On the other hand, what we have is Adolescence. This is kind of more so every parent's worst nightmare, what happens when you're too hands off and you don't really know what's going on with your child and you're misreading all of the signs. But at the same time, the kid was obviously a liar, psychopathic, and had a lot of issues, and it was just kind of like a worst case scenario of everything that you don't want to happen to a child, because the child, he ended up killing somebody, and then he basically lied to his dad about it, and then when he got caught, he was still kind of trying to lie about it, and then his dad didn't want to accept it, didn't want to believe it, and so his whole family was ruined by this situation that their son caused. Their son had to go to jail and all of that, and this show was based in the UK, so things are a little bit different there, but these TV shows are completely different. One is kind of like an idealized version, it uplifts the Black community and just shows the Black community in a different light, and then you have this other TV show where it's kind of like every parent's worst nightmare. And basically what connects the two TV shows is basically parents figuring out and navigating how to raise their children, how to be involved in their lives and all of that stuff, because in Forever, Keisha's mom, she's a single mom, she works all the time, she's not really around. We have Justin's mom who has some high-powered job, the family's super wealthy, and she is involved in critical moments as her son is exploring this relationship with Keisha. And so just there's different dynamics at play here that I definitely think are worth a bigger conversation that they could have touched on a little bit more, because I know that everyone is talking about Forever in the Black community because it is such a great TV show, but I do just want to kind of expand on that a little bit more. And again, if you want to check out the two videos that I have on Forever and Adolescence, it's really just for my binge watch Britney podcast series, and I'm recapping the season. So if that's something that you want to check out, definitely go ahead and do that. Before we move on, one other thing that I want to highlight is because the purpose of this interview with Michelle, Craig, and Barack is to talk about raising young men. So in Forever, we do have Justin, who has ADHD. He's more emotionally aware of his feelings. He has trouble talking to his mom about what he's feeling, and he's kind of pushing back a little bit on everything that she's trying to do as far as like building their relationship and connecting with him. And he also is not the typical athlete. Even though he plays basketball, he's not very good at it at all. And so we're just seeing him dealing with like his emotions and how he's feeling about everything, and how he interacts with his mom, how he interacts with his dad, how he interacts with his girlfriend. And then on the flip side, you have the boy that I was talking about, who is really not opening up to his parents. He's deceiving them, he's lying, and then he's causing all of this chaos and conflict in his small town and neighborhood. Okay, so moving on, they talked a lot about what it means to be a man. They defined a man as being a protector. And for me, I think of, because I'm really big on my TV shows, as evident by my Binge Watch Britney podcast series. And when I think of being a protector, I think of someone like Spencer Dutton from the Yellowstone 1923 series. So what I really like about Spencer Dutton is he is the one that everyone is waiting for to come home. He's just really strong and not necessarily aggressive, but he steps into that dominant role when he needs to, and everyone knows that they can count on him. And what I really like about him is that we see him step up as a protector in different situations. Obviously, they're waiting for him to come back and claim his throne as the next in line to take over Yellowstone. He steps in and he helps that one boy who he is traveling on a boat with across to get back to America, and he sees that the boy is being abused. He doesn't like it, and he steps in right away and does the right thing to put a stop to it. And then also we see him protecting his fiance, his wife, and all of that stuff, and we see him jumping off a train to go rescue somebody. They stop a train for him and all of that stuff. And so when I think of a protector, I think of someone like Spencer Dutton. People would usually think of like Superman or like someone from the comics or animated movies and TV shows. So I think it's super important for men to continue to be protected and have some ideal that they can aspire to, or someone that they can look up to, even if that person is not their own father, or if they don't have a father figure in the home. They do need those male figures out there in TV and entertainment that they can look up to that are aspirational. They also talked about a man being self-sufficient, so obviously you need to be able to take care of yourself. You need to be able to figure out how to do whatever it is you need to do, X, Y, and Z. If you need to figure out how to get from point A to point B, you should be able to figure that out. If you need to feed yourself, you should be able to cook and all of that stuff. And then also being able to get along with other people, not being a jerk is something that Craig brought up. And so obviously as a man, you're going to be in different circles. You're going to be in charge of your family, raising your family. You're going to be at work. You're going to be in your community socially. You're going to be part of your church. You're going to be part of going to the gym or whatever little clubs that you're involved with. And you need to be able to get along with different people, build those relationships, and create a sense of community. So you need to add to your community instead of detracting or taking away from it. Okay, so next up I want to talk about Craig and his dad. So he was talking about their father, him and Michelle, and basically he was talking about how their dad works a lot, but then also he would just come home, put his feet up, relax and all of that stuff, and their mom was cooking. And so they were talking about how their family, they had very traditional gender roles, and there's some families where the dad works all day, but then when he comes home, he's very involved with the family. He helps the mom make dinner, he helps the kids with their homework, puts them to bed, so it's not like he just works and then he comes home and goes to his man cave and is not involved with anything. So I think it was good that they talked about that dynamic, because obviously not all men are like that. They work, come home, and they're very involved with their family. And so what Craig brought up is being around different circles of men or male spaces, and he talked about going to like the barber shop and all of that stuff, and just having a male figure around that he could look up to and kind of learn things from, like gentleman behavior, walking on a certain side of a street, opening the doors and all of that stuff. And I actually, for the longest time, I was with a friend in New York, and he would always walk on the outside of the street, and I did not know why, because I did not see other men doing that when I was interacting with someone or whatever. And so I asked him about it one time, and he was just like, hey, you know, like, this is just what I'm supposed to do. And it was weird because at times I would wait for him to correct if he was on the wrong side of the street, but then other times I would actually say, oh, he's on the wrong side, or I'm on the wrong side, and I would move to the inside so that he was on the outside. And so I think you need to have that balance of having men understand how they're supposed to function in society, the gentlemanly things that they're supposed to do, but then also having women and making sure that women are aware of that so that they can ensure that there's that balance. Because a lot of the time each gender only knows what they're supposed to do, and when they come together they don't really know how to mesh because they haven't been taught that. And so I think that is super important, because that just helps everyone understand what the gender roles are, how those pieces fit together. And then if you deviate from that, totally fine. You just need to know what the counterbalance is to that, because if you have a feminine man and a masculine female, obviously that can work, but if you're both trying to be the same thing, it's not going to work. So you have to figure out the proper balance, and you have to know what you're each bringing to the table in order to be able to figure out that balance. Okay, and then next up, Michelle brought up the internal traits, because she felt like they were really focusing on external traits, like how you behave in public and how you treat other people. And she really wanted to focus on the internal self and the relationship that men have with themselves, how they talk about their feelings. And so this was a great point that she brought up, because the stereotype for men is that they aren't supposed to cry, they aren't supposed to talk about their emotion. And in Forever, we do see Justin talking about his feelings, being open, being honest, being transparent, and that's not something that a lot of men are used to seeing. They're used to kind of denying their emotion, or wait until they're in private to actually show what they're feeling, or they don't know how to handle their emotions and they lash out, they react violently and all of that stuff. And so it is super important for men to be able to identify what they're feeling and why, and then identify ways to resolve the tension that they're feeling in constructive and helpful ways, versus overreacting, lashing out and all of that stuff. And so I do think it is important for men to be able to recognize what's going on with them mentally and emotionally, because for athletes, because Black men are heavily involved in sports, you do see Black men struggling with mental health. Like when they stop playing, they have to learn how to transition into being something else other than an athlete, and that's where mental health comes into play, because if you don't know how to deal with those feelings that you're dealing with, you are going to struggle. So with that being said, I think we do need to open up the door for men to be able to talk about their feelings. I was watching the season 6 of Love Island, and there was a couple up there, Leah and Rob. The season 6 cast was phenomenal, and there was this moment where Rob ended up crying about something. I think the new bombshell that he was dating, I can't remember her name, but is it Nicole? I don't know, something like that. She was maybe being kicked out or something was going wrong, and he was crying, and she saw him crying. And so when the girls went back to their like bathroom or the area where they got ready, she was just trash talking him, and she was basically saying how disgusted she was by the fact that he was crying. And this is exactly what we're talking about, where men are expected to not show any negative emotions or emotions that make them vulnerable. Otherwise, they will be criticized, as Leah did to Rob. And obviously, later on, she apologized for it, but the damage is already done, because you can see how detrimental it is when a man is vulnerable like that, and then he just gets criticized or chastised by the woman for being vulnerable. And so I think it's super important that we allow men to be vulnerable. One of the other things that I thought was really cool that Barack brought up, because I'm starting to read books more, I've gotten a Kindle, and he talked about how books helped him kind of figure out emotions and deal with them, because obviously they said that if you read 1,000 books, it's like living 1,000 lifetimes, because you're getting so much more experience, and you're experiencing things that were written by other people, and you're kind of getting you're learning from them, their ideas, the way they see things, and all of that stuff. And if you don't have a lot of friends, if you don't get out of the house a lot, and you don't have that exposure, you wouldn't otherwise have all of that insight and all of that information and stuff that you're getting through books and those stories. And he talked about how reading a lot was an avenue for him to kind of learn about himself emotionally, and to have that conversation with himself and kind of like identify what he's feeling, kind of going from there to kind of work to resolve those issues or whatever situation he was dealing with as a result of those feelings. And now to tie back to raising young men, this is where Craig jumped in, and he was saying that in terms of being a man, having spaces for men and all of that stuff, he was saying that he had to cut down on his circle of friends, because he wanted to focus on, I guess, friends who were raising children and going through the same thing that he was dealing with, and or like just a similar experience of raising kids and all of that stuff. And I think that that's so normal, because one, you may already have a small friend group, but if you have a lot of friends who aren't going through the same things that you're going through, it does make it harder for you to relate to them. So that's why you see a lot of people, when they become married or when they get married, they are hanging out with their married friends more, because they're going to understand what they're going through. If they see marriage the same way, they're going to respect it and protect it in a way that single people may not, or a divorced couple may not. They're going to want to try to save the marriage rather than break it down and separate it. And this was a moment that we saw on Real Housewives. This was a moment that we saw on Married to Medicine, where there were two couples basically on the brink of divorce, Simone and her husband, and then Dr. Jackie and Curtis. I can't remember what Simone's husband is, what his name is, but anyway, Simone and her husband, they were basically on the brink of divorce because he had a female friend that he always wanted to hang out with, and she didn't like it. And so basically, Phaedra came to Married to Medicine, and basically she was saying that she had gotten a divorce because of Real Housewives of Atlanta, the stuff that her husband, Apollo, was going through and all of that stuff. And she was saying that had she had that circle of friends, maybe she and Apollo would still be married. And so that shows you the importance of having certain people around you and who you have around you, because if you have the wrong people around you, they can either help strengthen your marriage or they can help weaken it, and that also impacts your family and how you're raising your kids, because Phaedra does have two sons that she is raising in now a broken home because she and Apollo are divorced. So it's super important who you have around as your friend group. So speaking of friend group, they also talked about loneliness and the manosphere. So I did look up some statistics. One statistic that I saw basically said that 15% of men have no friends, and I can absolutely relate to that because I have no friends. I only speak to my immediate family members, so my mom, my dad, my sister, my aunt, and my uncle. And then when I was working, I did interact with people via work, but outside of that, I don't really have any friends. And so this is why I really rely on the internet read books and all of that stuff, TV shows, movies, to help kind of give me those experiences that I was talking about and that Obama was talking about, that he was able to get through reading books. And so I think it's fine if you don't have friends, but you do need to have a value system that you can fall back onto, because you are not getting that everyday experience with different people and having those different interactions that will help shape you as a person. And so I really think it all starts with your value system and what you're taught. Treat people how you want to be treated. Don't be judgmental. Find out all of the facts before you judge a person or whatever. And then really just make sure that you know right from wrong and that you live up to that every day, and that you make decisions being willing to accept the consequences of whatever that decision is. And going back to Obama, so one of the things that he talked about was how he had a small group of friends when he was in high school or whatever, and he said that later on he realized that all of the friends in that group, they were all kids of single moms. He did grow up with a young mother, a teen mom, and so I think it's super important that you have friends who can relate to what you're going through, but you also do need to have friends with different experiences, because that can help shape you as well. And this is just going back to the importance of having friends, because if you do not have friends, then you're at risk of being lonely. And then when you get into and when you find yourself in situations where you do things that you wouldn't normally do because you're not used to being in those situations, that can cause problems as well. And so men are lonelier now than they've been previously. Women, I think I saw one statistic that said that men, maybe 6 out of 10 men are single compared to women, or they don't have a sexual partner or whatever. And so I thought that was very interesting, because I think they're saying that there's more men than women, so women would struggle to find a partner because they have less options in that sense. And so I'm not surprised that more men are single, but then also to tying back to the fact that men are lonely and they're looking for these forms of connection. This is where they started talking about the internet and how you have different male influential figures who are popping up and kind of trying to bridge the gap for those men, and they can do it either in healthy ways or in bad ways. You have people like Andrew Tate and his brother, Tristan Tate, and then you also have there's that guy, that black guy, I think he passed away, but he was big on like high value men and all of that stuff, and he was really controversial. And so you want to make sure that you have the right male influential figures who are speaking to young men and helping them shape themselves and how they see the world, because if you have limited experience or exposure to other boys and elder men who can be role models for you, you are subject to whatever you can find, and it may not always be good. And so just to kind of tie that into my next point, Obama was talking about how he had that friend group when he was young, and kind of like maintaining those relationships and just being intentional about maintaining those relationships. He talked about how they moved around, and obviously when they were younger, they didn't have as much money, and so they couldn't travel as much, but really just being intentional to stay in touch with your friends, keep those dynamics going, keep the conversation going, and appreciate those people while you have them, and kind of lean on them, open up to them to kind of navigate whatever it is that you're going through, because it is important to have a support system. And as you get older, your circle naturally gets smaller, and that's already going to be a struggle if you are someone who has no friends, because your circle is already super small. And so if you are to make that circle bigger, you need to be really intentional about the people that you have in your circle and the people that you rely on and you lean on to help you navigate and move through life. Okay, so now I'm going to get into my next few points, and this is around raising our daughters and loving our sons. And then throughout this section, I am going to reference the viral moment from the clip where Obama was talking about having a gay mentor or whatever. We can just talk about that a little bit more. So basically what they talked about in this section is that there's basically not enough men in the lives of young men. So obviously we know that more black men are in prison or locked up or dead because of just political decisions that were made, the drug epidemic and all of that stuff, crime, black on black crime and all of that stuff. And then also we have a lot of single parent families, just from how fractured the black community is, how fractured the black family is. with everything with welfare and keeping men out of the home so that women could get welfare, and just a lot of effort to separate Black families. And so what they talked about is that you need to really create a structure for men to have rituals, guidance, and being able to meet a wide range of role models. They talked about the education system and how this is not really an avenue for men to, or young men to meet elder men who can guide them and be role models, because they're saying that most teachers are women, there's not a lot of men, and so who do you look to? Where do you get that influence of men? And really, they just talked about finding assets in the community. And Obama was then talking about how you need to find different types of men. He was talking about how you can have exposure to men who are more soft-spoken, men who are louder, men who have different careers, and all of that stuff. And I think that all of that is important, but in the quest to find a wide range of role models, you need to make sure that they all have the same core values, because it doesn't matter if you have a role model who's a dentist, who's an athlete, who's a doctor, who is a actor, whatever, if they all have different values, because then I think it makes it confusing on what exactly you follow, and it makes it easier for you to follow the wrong thing. So if you see a group of men who all do different things as far as their career, have different personality, and have the same core values and similar mannerisms and how they approach the world, I think that makes it a little bit easier for a man to find himself and to identify with a certain image of what a man is supposed to be. Because when there's too much out there, I think it makes it harder for young people to filter out and hone in on the one thing that makes sense to them, because what can make sense to you at one moment may not make sense to you at a different moment. And so I think it's super important to make sure that you are able to see all of these different types of men with the same value at the critical moments of your life. Because say you're going through something, your brain is not right, you're not thinking right, you see a guy who seems like he has a great job, he's your mentor, but then you find out later on down the line that he cheats on his wife or whatever, or is abusive, whatever, and there were signs along the way that you missed just because you weren't in the right mental space to either recognize those flags, or you weren't even aware of those flags. And so I think it's important that if you are looking for a role model and you have different people to choose from, or you have a group of men who do different things, you need to make sure that the core values are the same, because that will help ensure that you're on the right path and that you're learning at least the critical things that you should be learning that is consistent among your different role models. So now we're getting into the viral moment from the show. So basically Obama said something to the effect of how he had a gay professor in college, and then he talked about how that professor basically set him straight when he was saying ignorant things. I don't know if he was saying things about the gay community, whatever, or what the ignorant stuff he was saying. He didn't really get into that. And then also he didn't really talk about what it means that this professor was gay. He did talk about how the professor was gay when it wasn't something that was openly displayed or whatever, in a time where it wasn't socially accepted or whatever. So I don't know if that means that this was a closeted gay person where only some people knew that he was gay, or nobody knew that he was gay, or whatever. And so I think that that's a little controversial, because what he's basically saying is that in order for young men to learn empathy and emotional intelligence, they need to have at least one gay friend or whatever in their lives, one gay mentor in their lives, so that they get that exposure to different things, so they know that they're not alone if they are gay, if they're non-binary, and all of that stuff. And so I think that that opens the door to a lot of questions, because how I approach it is, well, if this person is gay and they are a bottom, that means they may be more feminine. So that is not giving you more exposure to men in the traditional sense. It's basically giving you access to what would otherwise just be another female, another woman who thinks the way that women do, right? So I don't think that that is good either, because you do need exposure to traditional manhood and what it means to be a man and all of that stuff. And you don't need more access to the feminine things, more access to women, all that stuff. Men have enough access to that. What they're missing is male role models, male figures, male leaders, and all of that stuff. And so that's not to say that you can't have a male leader or a male role model who is gay, but you would want it to be, I guess, a top who would be more like a straight man. He wants to be a provider. He is the head of a household. He wants to be a protector, because those are the things that young men need more exposure to, being that they're already being raised in single parent households with women. They don't have fathers in the home either because of jail or death or all of that stuff, and they just need more access to that traditional positive masculinity instead of people who are male and popular but have all of the wrong values, or they're pursuing the wrong things in life. And so I think that topic was a little bit controversial for me, just because I want to know a little bit more information about what exactly he was saying, because you can have straight men who are emotionally intelligent, they have empathy for others, and they're open-minded and all of that stuff. Someone's sexuality doesn't really make you that way, and so that's why I was a little confused on why that was coming up. And then obviously I'm not speaking on the obvious implications of that. A lot of people thought that this was just coded for grooming and all of that stuff, and so I'm not really going to talk too much about that, but I did just want to point out my points and my opinion based on what I heard him say in that interview. Okay, so, and then also Michelle talked about how the internet is not a good source of community, of what it means to be a young man and all of that stuff. She talked about young men, young boys playing video games, being on the internet, listening to male influencers who may or may not have the right values. And then she also talked about how people need to seek out connections in real life. Obviously, I am a horrible example of this because I don't have friends. I do spend a lot of time at home. I am a homebody, and I don't have a circle of friends in real life. And so I do think that this is important, but what you do in the home matters just as much, because as I think we're growing more to be a society that is more independent and more individual versus the group and the community. So it is super important to moderate what people are doing in their home and making sure that it is still full of the right values, the right behaviors, and all of that stuff. Because you know how you can have someone who is so great in public and outside of his home, but when he comes home, he's terrorizing everybody. So you just want to make sure that what you're doing in your home is appropriate, is the right thing to do, and all of that stuff, because that does affect you when you go out into the real world. And then also you don't want to deal with people who are basically living two different lives. Or one person at home and there's somebody else outside in the public, because that obviously is not a good dynamic, especially if they are an abusive person, if they are toxic, and if they are not contributing to their societies, to their families in a positive way. And then the other thing that she brought up was how young men need to do more than sports. So I find this to be a little bit controversial as someone who played basketball. Everyone in my family played basketball. And so I think that sports is a great avenue for young men. Obviously, not everybody gets to make it to the NBA, to play overseas and all of that stuff. They spend a lot of time working to get to that point so that they can make a name for themselves, generate income and all of that stuff, take care of their families. So I do think that sports is exactly what young men need, because you do get that structure of learning how to play a game, how to play it the right way, knowing the rules of the game, the dynamics that you have with your coaches, with your teammates, with everybody else within that organization. It is a brotherhood that you are building when you play on a team, when you move through an organization. And I think that that is being missed in all of that, because people are just seeing kind of like the lifestyle and the rewards of being a famous athlete without really understanding kind of like the groundwork and the foundation that comes with all of that. Because I think what you can equate it to is how dope boys and drug dealers, they live the fast life. It's all about quick money, the women and all of that stuff. And so when you see that kind of glamorized within the sports world, that is the equivalent of that, of what you're seeing. You're not seeing the people who are genuinely just playing basketball. They're doing what they love. They go home to their families. They take care of their families. They have good values. They're doing all of the right things that they're supposed to. They're contributing to their community. And so I think that all of that gets underappreciated and overlooked when we talk about young men needing to do other things in sports, because you are getting those exposure to different young boys and what they're going through, their journey. You have different coaches along the way. You're not going to have the same coach at every level or every summer, whatever it is that you do when you are moving through your different teams, like your school team, your AAU team, your college team, your pro team, and so on. And so I think it's super important that we do not rule out sports as a avenue for men, because it's not like being in the army, but when you go to the army, you have to go through training, you have to learn how to be disciplined, you have to be physically fit and take care of your body, and then you also have to work your way up the ranks. And so obviously if you were to go into combat, that's not even comparable to sports at all. Sports is kind of nothing. The soldiers who are overseas and fighting and all of that, they are doing traditionally what men used to do before sports became an avenue. I feel like in the 50s and 60s, everybody, you know, went to the army, kind of that is what you did to become a man and all of that stuff. And so now the alternative to that, I would say, is kind of going the sports route, because other than that, you'd have people becoming doctors, lawyers, and all of that stuff. And so I feel like the army was kind of something that people did either when they didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives and they needed that structure and the discipline to kind of grow into a man, like the parents were struggling to like get through to a child and all of that stuff. But then also it was just the natural order of things. You just go to the army to learn to become a man, not because anything's wrong with you, but that's just like the right thing to do. And I feel like sports is kind of that now. You do have some people still going to the army, that's great, that's awesome, but I think sports is another avenue where you can still get that discipline, that sense of brotherhood, and kind of work up to something to achieve a goal. And we lose sight of that with all of the drama and all of the craziness that happens when you get that high up in society. You have a lot of access to money and you're doing all of the wrong things. And so I don't think it's wrong for young men to be sports minded, but it also opens the door to other avenues. So you have a lot of athletes who are rappers or involved in music or involved in movies and all of that stuff. And so I think as you become more successful in sports, it does naturally just open up other doors for you, and it opens up doors that you may not have had a easier time to get through if you did not play sports. And so I do think it's important to acknowledge that sports does set the foundation or the ground level for someone's success if they do the right things, they work hard at it, and they are good people. And lastly, the other thing I want to talk about is that they kind of ended the conversation with talking about men not being present, and they talked about basically how men for a long time their identity was tied into being a provider, being the head of a household, but then when you have a lot of job loss in the Black community and also in the world at large, this is where women were able to naturally step in, take over. It's easier for women to get jobs, and so now if women are having an easier time getting employed, making higher money, or making a higher income, it leaves the men kind of figuring out what their worth is, what their contributions are. I think you can have women who are employed and have higher salaries and all of that stuff, but with that comes the idea that women either want to marry a man who makes the same amount of money or has the same type of job. They don't want to marry down in a sense. And I think we need to make that okay and normalize that, because we can't take away all of these opportunities for men and tell them that they still need to do the traditional gender roles that are expected of them if we are not creating an environment that allows them to do that. I think it's totally fine if you have a stay-at-home dad, or if you have a man who's making a lower income than the woman he's dating or whatever, but I think that we need to normalize that if we want to get out of this mindset that men are not present or not doing what they're supposed to do, when we've kind of turned the world upside down. So if that's the case, if the world is upside down, then we need to also change our expectations of men. So I am very traditional in that sense. I do want a man who is a provider, the head of a household, that sort of thing. And so I have certain things that I am looking for in a future partner, but I think that that requires kind of an adjustment from me in that sense. I don't want to spend, if I have children, I don't want to spend my life working and trying to raise my kids, because I know that I would be more focused on my job than my kids. So I want to be able to be home with my kids, raise them, have the husband go out, make the money and all of that stuff, take care of the household, and kind of have that traditional dynamic going on. But in the world that we live in and with the way that I was raised, that was not always what was taught to me. And so it does require an adjustment if you do want a world where men are more present, more traditional and all of that stuff. You kind of have to revert back on some of the things that you have been doing as a woman in order to kind of seek whatever it is that you are looking for. And if you are open to having a man who doesn't follow those traditional gender roles, then you have to be more accepting of that as well in society, so that those dynamics can naturally happen and aren't as frowned upon. And so we have changed the world that we live in, and so it kind of makes it less possible for men to be present in the way that they were hundreds of years ago, and we need to either revert back or we need to be more accepting of what the traditional gender roles look like now. How are those defined and what are they, so that we can better find a balance between men and women. Okay, so to wrap up this video, we talked about a lot of great moments from this interview, and basically the whole point is to kind of come together and kind of figure out how we can better raise young men so that they can contribute to the world in a positive way, while also having good role models, having a male figure that they can learn from, relate to, and all of that stuff, and help guide them into grown men who are able to be leaders of a household, take care of a family, contribute to raising their children, and also positively contribute to society and kind of make a difference. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, it goes back to kind of how our families are integrated, as far as the mothers and the fathers living together. Are they divorced? Are they single parents? What is the community of men that you have around you? Are these men that you can aspire to be like? Do they have good values? And then also just the presence of men in the community. Do we have a lot of men who are around and involved in raising their families, taking care of their families? Or do we have men who are dead, in jail, who are around and just not wanting to contribute to the family that they've created and raised in the next generation? And so there are a lot of good moments and good things that were discussed in this interview. I've shared my insights on some of that, and hopefully this video was helpful. I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.